whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in God alone I trust, I will not be afraid. What can mortal man do to me?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Preterist Apologetics. My name is Don K. Preston. Over here to my left or right or whatever that is Mike Sullivan. And we're so glad to have you back for another round of Preterist Apologetics. Mike, how's your day been going?
It's been going well. My wife just made me a great ribeye steak.
Ooh.
And yeah.
So I had Subway.
You had Subway. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've been studying for next Sunday. I'll be filling in for Pastor Curtis. So I've been hot and heavy in Revelation, I think, as everyone can tell, because I'm pumping out all these. I get so excited when I make my charts and stuff. It's like I can't wait until I actually present something. I have to throw a lot out there. Most of the time I over prepare, and then the painful part is cutting stuff out that you don't really want to, but for time's sake, you just have to do it. So
I know that feeling well.
I bet you do.
I know that feeling really, really well. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, as I've already said this, but I'm very, very excited about the upcoming conference in Arkansas called the Arkansas Eschatology Conference. And it's my understanding they're basically sold out of spots.
Yeah.
And, I still have people asking me, even now, I didn't know about this. When is it? Who's speaking and all this kind of stuff. So I direct them to them. So I don't know if they're still getting requests or not. But
yeah, I don't know if they can go beyond 300. I don't know if the place will hold it, but that's going to be one of the biggest conferences, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
It really will. It really will. I know that at Warren, Ohio, once or twice they went up over 200, but not very many times. And here at Arkansas, here at Ardmore, we hit something like 156, I think, on one occasion, which was a good crowd. But no, we've never approached 300 at any other conference that I'm aware of. So this is really exciting. And I've had people ask me, well, why do you think this conference then is really, really seeming to bust out? And my own personal opinion is, COVID kept people in. Okay, that's led up to a certain extent. But Mike, as you know, interest in covenant eschatology has just been exploding everywhere.
It really has, yeah.
And so I think the interest has just grown exponentially just from a few years ago. And I think you can see this in the growth of the Facebook pages that are dedicated to preterism. There is one preterist Facebook page entitled Fulfilled Prophecy. They're up over 14,000 members now.
Oh my goodness. I better check that out.
Oh, it's a good page. I think Dan Maines, if I'm not mistaken, excuse me. I think he's certainly one of the admins. I don't know if he's the owner or not, but when I believe it was Dan that reached out and asked me to go ahead and post my videos there on that. And that was way back when it was like 6,000 or 7,000 members. And I'm going, whoa, wow, that's impressive. And so they have just been growing exponentially. One Facebook page that I personally co-own, if you please, with Alan Morton. It's Preterist Doctrine. Just early last year, and I'm talking up until middle of last year, it was like 1.1 thousand, 1,100 members. Well, now it's pushing 3,000.
Nice.
So we are seeing this kind of ramped up interest in covenant eschatology. So I think, just in my personal opinion, I believe that when you couple the fact that people are really anxious to get out and to attend something right now, and you couple that with the increased interest in covenant eschatology, I believe, is, to use the old cliche, it's almost a perfect storm. So it's really, really, exciting. Christian, I honestly do not know. Mike, do you know if this will be online?
It is going to be online. I don't know if it's going to be live. I know it will be recorded and posted.
Okay.
I just don't know off the top of my head if it'll be live, but we'll find out the answer to that question at some point.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's very, very exciting. I mean, the very first time I spoke, it was at a debate, formal debate that I had in Indianapolis in 2008. And this was a Church of Christ lectureship, and they had the debate, at night. And there were 250, 275 men there, not one of which was a preterist, by the way, except for a few. But that was the largest, quote, eschatology conference that I had spoken of up to that point. So, yeah, this is very, very exciting.
And to give a lot of credit to Zach and Travis, they've been producing videos left and right, and they have a pretty good sized church there as well. So I'm guessing at least half of the 300 will probably be their church. And even at Berean, I know Pastor Curtis can usually go over the 100. He just likes 100, and he has to kind of send people away. But this is going to be really exciting, and I'm just really impressed with Zach and Travis, all the work that they're doing, they're producing, all the different responses they're giving. And so, yeah, it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Zach and Travis have just done a great job. I didn't even know about him except sort of kind of word of mouth. You might have mentioned them on one occasion, and then they actually reached out to me to ask me to be on a video with them. And, I mean, they're Arkansas boys, and I'm a hog. I'm a Razorback. So sure, I'll be glad to be on with you. I mean, they got to be good if they're Razorbacks. That's all there is to it. So anyway, had a really good show with them. And of course, from that, I've become more and more familiar with them. And I've been very, very impressed with the job that they're doing. Yeah, they're doing some good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we are continuing our study in Deuteronomy 32, known as the Song of Moses. This is a song that Israel would sing on her Sabbaths and her feast days. And it was just ingrained in their head. And it prophesied the end of Israel's Old Covenant age, a perverse and crooked generation, that end time terminal generation, last days generation. And so Don and I have just taken our time going through this. Don has given a lecture on the Song of Moses, I think at one of your conferences. Mm-hmm. I did one recently at the Berean conference. But this is kind of nice for Don and I because we can just take our time. And, like we talked about earlier, you have to cut out so much stuff. And we don't have to cut out a lot of stuff. We can kind of just take our time. And so we went through Deuteronomy 31, 32 in Isaiah's prophecy, and we showed how Moses' eschatology was a foundation for Isaiah, and he built upon it. And then we got into Daniel, and Daniel just further builds upon it, makes it more clear. Now we know that when that end would be near, that appointed end would be near. Daniel says he connects that to the Roman Empire, and he connects the Messiah not to be this shore bull that's going to be sacrificed in Deuteronomy 32 or 33, but it's the prince. It's the anointed Messiah. He's going to be cut off. He's going to make a new covenant for the many. And in the middle of that, with that last 7, we have the earthly ministry of Christ. He's cut off. But then we have that last 3.5 years. And Don, you've been spending some time looking at Kairos and the Septuagint there, and how that's just powerful, because in the Septuagint, it's not just talking about Messiah the prince, but he appoints another prince to actually deal with that end time scenario, right?
The more I look at the Septuagint of Daniel 9, 26 and 27, I believe that a person could actually make a case that Daniel 9, 26 and 27 in the Septuagint predicted the resurrection of Jesus. And here's why. The Messiah, he shall be cut off. And it says, the Septuagint says, he shall be destroyed. Well, cut off is a good translation there, but not for himself. And then this cut off Messiah would then destroy the city by the prince the other prince that should come.
He has to be alive to appoint the prince, doesn't he?
Have to be alive to appoint and to use the prince. And when I saw that, I thought, well, little wonder that the modern day Jews don't want to look at the Septuagint. For crying out loud. Here's a prediction. If you got Messiah cut off, but that Messiah that is cut off, but not for himself, so it's a propitiatory, substitutionary death, that Messiah then uses another prince to destroy the city. Resurrection.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, that's a little bit off topic, slightly, but not all that much, maybe. But when I saw that, I was like, man alive, this is just absolutely incredible. But to return to the point that you made, over the last several weeks, I've been in an ongoing discussion with a guy on Facebook. And I have to give him credit. He was very cordial, very courteous, never called names, except one time he got a little flustered, you could tell. And I called him out on it. I said, normally when a man starts calling names, then you know that he knows he's lost the discussion. Right. Well, so he toned right down and we went on. But he is just absolutely adamant that the 70 weeks ended in AD 34 and 35. Now, that's the position of Kenneth Gentry. It's the position confirmed to me and for me by Gary DeMar just a couple of months ago in a private email. And that's a very, very common view in the post-millennial or partial preterist world, even among a lot of amillennialists. Just today, I was reading something on Facebook and somebody said, well, it's very clear the 70 weeks ended in 34 and 35. Well, I had to, you know me, I'm so quiet and shy and reluctant.
Yeah, very reserved, Don.
Very reserved.
You got to get out of your shell a little bit more.
I know. So I had to comment. No, sorry, it didn't end in 34, 35. But anyway, in the discussion with this one individual, I said, here's the Septuagint. And I made several other arguments, none of which he addressed, not one of which. But I said, here's the Septuagint. At the end of the appointed time, and this is Suntulia Kairu in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew.
Is that the plural of kairos? Or what's Kairu?
No, Kairu is the genitive form.
Oh, okay.
If I be not mistaken there. And so, and I've got a good friend. He'll correct me on that if I'm wrong, and that's great. He kind of sits as a referee on my Greek, and he really helps me out, and I really appreciate it. I don't mind being corrected at all. His name's Gerald Davis. Really, really a good student of the Greek, and like I said, boy, if I kind of blow a Greek tense or a word or whatever, next morning email. And like I said, boy, I don't resent that even the slightest bit. I really appreciate it, as a matter of fact. So I believe that's a genitive form there, Suntulia Kairu. So the point of it is, Suntulia is consummation, or as the Septuagint renders it in the English, the end of the appointed time. So it has the definite article, the consummation of the appointed time. Well, what is the appointed time? It's the 70 weeks. But here's the kicker to it. And this is what I pointed out to this gentleman. And I use that word gentleman in the true sense. I pointed out to this gentleman, at the consummation of the appointed time, an end, suntelios, consummation, end, shall be made to the desolations. Okay, so the end of the appointed time, the end of the 70 weeks, would bring or would be at the time of the end of the desolation. Well, here's a kicker. There were no desolations in 34, 35 AD to be brought to an end.
Exactly.
So
and he tells you in verse 24, it's about the people and their city.
Exactly right.
So the city's destruction or desolation and the abominations have to be connected to the 490 years. You just can't.
Yeah, and that to me is devastating for the view of Gentry, who says, well, the 70 weeks are determined for Jesus to appoint the city, or to determine the fate of the city. No, that's absolutely inaccurate, because Daniel 9 is the time of the determination of the fate of the city. After the 69th week, the city shall be, and the sanctuary shall be destroyed. That's the determination of it. Jesus confirmed that determination, but he didn't determine it. And so, again, the kicker to me, and back to that fantastic word, kairos, the consummation of the appointed time, the end of the appointed time, is the end of the desolations. The end of the desolations, the end of the appointed time, are Siamese twins. You cannot separate them. And yet, what I started to point out, Kenneth Gentry says, well, Jesus determined the fate of the city within the 70 weeks, but the actual destruction lies outside the 70. Sorry, that has the end of the desolations after the appointed time, not at the appointed time. Exactly. And not at the consummation of the appointed time. And so to me, this is just, it is absolutely devastating. And I remember several months ago at the end of one of our shows, and this is almost immediately after I had discovered this, and of course I was just busting out. My seams were busting out. I just had to share this somehow, some way, and off air, or maybe at the very end of the program, I said, Mike, I've discovered something on the Septuagint of Daniel 9 that is absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, I did that at the very end of the show. And we had just barely hung up, and you texted me or email, okay. You can't leave me hanging like this.
Yeah. And, that kind of got me on a kick. And when I was studying the Song of Moses, I got to verse 35, and it said, the time would be near. And I'm like, I'm wondering what's going on with time here. I'm wondering if in the Septuagint, if that might be kairos. And I did a study, and sure enough, it was. And I was kind of like you and Daniel. I was like, I
know.
And that makes the weave just perfect for me. Anyway, I was just like,
it does. I said on another program, and I've been on like 3 different interviews this week. I've forgotten which one it was, but I was pointing out to this individual the significance of kairos. And I said, this is a word that many scholars make comment on, but they don't follow the thread at all. And when you follow that thread of kairos from the Old Testament all the way into the New, and you see that in the New, and this is an observation I made on that particular interview, the Old Testament prophets are very, very clear that the kairos that they were predicting was not for their day. That's Daniel chapter 12.
Right.
That's Daniel 7. This is Daniel 9. And so when the Old Testament writers tell us that the kairos that they are predicting was not for their day, but was, by mere calculation, far off, Daniel, go your way, you'll sleep with your fathers, etc., etc. And okay, here come the New Testament writers. Here comes Jesus saying, the time, kairos, is fulfilled. The kingdom of heaven has drawn near. So this, by the way, to me, is an incredible refutation of the idea and the claim made by people who say, well, God can't tell time. God doesn't talk in time like we do. So when in the Old Testament, you've got God through the prophets saying, it's not time. The appointed time is not here. It's for the last days. And you have centuries pass, and all of a sudden Jesus comes along and says, hey guys, the time, the kairos, has arrived.
Yeah. I had a gentleman, you get this all the time. Well, what if, AD 70 was a type, but it was a type of, Adamic eschatology, which is, the end of world history. And of course, there's many, many ways of answering that. And I think you've even written a book just on that one subject alone. But one of the things that came to my mind was kairos. And it's like, there's only one appointed
There's only one time.
There's one end, there's one appointed time, and when it comes, it would be near. There's nothing about multiple ends, multiple appointed times. And it's just an example of people not liking how scripture says something's going to be fulfilled. They have something else drummed up in their head because of tradition and what they've been taught and the creeds. And so they're forced then to make another appointed time, another end, which Scripture just does not teach.
You know, I was sitting here thinking, as you mentioned once again, Deuteronomy 32, 35, that at the appointed time it shall be near. And I was thinking about Isaiah 60 and verse 22. Now,
Yeah.
Isaiah 60 is a prediction of the New Jerusalem.
Another projected imminence.
Another projected imminence. And Yahweh said in Isaiah 60, verse 22, in its time, I will bring it to pass swiftly. So when the appointed time, Kairos, arrived, and it very, very clearly was not time when Isaiah wrote, I will bring it to pass swiftly. So Isaiah 60, verse 22 is a reiteration of Deuteronomy 32, 35. In Israel's last days, at the time, the appointed time, then consummation would be near. It's being repeated in Isaiah 60, verse 22. In its time, I will bring it to pass swiftly.
Amen. And for those of you that want to study that, go back to one of our shows where we were covering Isaiah's eschatology with the Song of Moses, and we covered Kairos there and all of those beautiful parallels. So having looked at Daniel, and of course we looked at 70 weeks, and then we went to Daniel 12, which is a recapitulation of Daniel 70 weeks. And there Daniel is focusing on that tail end, that 3.5 years, when the city would become desolate and, you know, the shattering of the holy people would take place. And he connects the resurrection, the end, the appointed end. Again, Kairos is there.
Mike, why don't we spend just a little more time on Daniel 12? Now, last week we put up a chart, one of my charts, paralleling Daniel 9 and Daniel chapter 12. And that was good. I think it was very, very effective. There you go.
See if I can find
But I think we need to address some objections. We are told.
I'm sorry, I don't have that one in this.
Oh, okay. Let me see here. Okay, let me see if I can draw that up one more time. Folks, forgive me here.
Let's see, I do.
Believe that's Revelation. I believe. No.
I had some parallels.
Here we are.
No, okay.
Okay. Now let me see if.
Let's see how good you're getting at StreamYard.
Oh boy. Okay. No.
I think you know what? I think I have to add it. Remember, because.
Okay. Let me. I'll present a slide.
There you go. Now I can put it on there.
Yeah, there you go. Now you'll have to scroll down to it.
Do you remember what number it is? Is it like 20?
It's way on down.
I think it was like 20 something. Oops. Whoa. This is Don's presentation he's been working on. Is this it? Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, there we are. Okay, this is the chart this is one of my presentations that I will be giving in Arkansas on it will be on Daniel 9 and the end of the millennium. And I believe that connection is absolutely firm. So I think, you know, I mentioned how the modern day Jews do not like the book of Daniel.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah. You know, my friend in Israel, world-class Hebrew scholar, I kept asking him questions on Daniel. And finally, I didn't realize he was getting frustrated because he was trying to answer my questions. And finally he said, why are you asking me all these questions on Daniel? He said, do you not understand that we don't consider Daniel a prophet? And of course I wrote back, and why is that? Mm-hmm. Well, hedge fudge. And he's a great guy. And all that. We've had some fantastic conversations over the internet and what have you. But they literally do not like Daniel because I think it's so clear. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Daniel is prophetic of Messiah in such a clear-cut way that if you accept Daniel as a prophetic inspired book,
you have to accept Christianity. There's no way.
You have to accept Christianity. You have to accept Jesus as a Messiah. Yep. I mean, for crying out loud. Well, let's start in Daniel chapter 12 because I want to make a few comments here that I think are very pertinent, and they have to do with the current state and discussion of eschatology among the enemies of covenant eschatology, and specifically among those who are former preterists. We are told, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, at that time, there shall be great tribulation, such as has never been, nor ever yet shall be. Or up to that time, never has been since there was a nation. There's a slightly different reading from Daniel 12 to Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. Anyway, so we are told by former preterists, well, the time of the Great Tribulation is the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And yet you look at the language of Daniel chapter 12, verse 1.
Yeah.
And you're going, well, wait a minute. I really don't think the time of Antiochus Epiphanes was the greatest tribulation that had ever been since there was a nation.
The Babylonians, the flood.
And after all, you go back to Daniel chapter 9. Now, Daniel says he's writing after the Babylonian, or at the end of the Babylonian captivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel says that was a time of tribulation like nothing before. Okay, so here's Daniel, who is calling the Babylonian tribulation the worst that had ever been to that time. But now we're being told by former preterists, well, yeah, but here's Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, describing the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, which he's supposedly living at the end of. Anyway, and Daniel's calling that tribulation the greatest tribulations that has ever been since there was a nation. Well, wait a minute. Back in Daniel 9, Daniel himself called the Babylonian tribulation the greatest ever. Are we supposed to believe that now he's changing his tune and he's seeing, and folks, if you are a student of history, if you are a student of biblical history, then compare the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem and Judah with the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Anybody who knows anything to compare the Babylonian destruction with the time of Antiochus Epiphanes knows that although the time of Antiochus Epiphanes was in fact a horrific situation, I'd never deny that, okay? But when you compare it with the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the time of Antiochus Epiphanes doesn't even begin to compare.
No, there was no desolation of the city or the temple.
No.
During that time. There was under the Babylonians. And like you usually point out, Josephus records how many?
Josephus records that there were 5 captures of the city, only 2 desolations. Babylonian, AD 70.
Mm-hmm.
So when people start telling us, oh yeah, you know, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, the greatest tribulation such as has never been, or since there was a nation. Well, Daniel denied that. Josephus, who knew his history, I venture to say better than these former preterists. And he says, well, the city was actually conquered 5 times, but only desolated twice. He doesn't, the only thing that he mentions about Antiochus Epiphanes is that Antiochus captured the city. He did not, as you rightly pointed out, he did not destroy the city. He did not destroy the sanctuary. And by the way, I love what Brett Petrie, one of my favorite authors, in his book, Jesus, Tribulation and the End of Exile, calls attention to the fact that in Daniel 9:26, it specifically says, the city and the sanctuary shall be destroyed. Destroyed. And as Brett Petrie says, this is the Achilles heel of the Antiochus Epiphanes posit, because neither the city or the temple were destroyed under Antiochus Epiphanes.
Amen.
So how can you say that the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, that Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 was the Great Tribulation, when it doesn't meet the criteria of the language, when it pales in significance to the Babylonian destruction that Daniel himself described as greater? It just simply doesn't work. And then when you, especially is this true, when you look at scholars such as Gregory Beale, in his commentary on the New Testament, commentary on the Old Testament in the New Testament, Gregory Beale says the Great Tribulation is in fact the entirety of the Christian age.
Wow.
You know, that to me, the very first time I read that, I was literally staggered that somebody of the erudition, the brilliance of Greg Beale would be so desperate in their eschatology as to come up with a view like that. And he's not alone. There are a few other very notable scholars that take that position, and one former preterist that I know of takes that position as well. But here's the deal. Jesus said, then, at the time of the abomination of desolation, which would appear in the land of Jerusalem, in the land of Israel, in the land of Judea, for then shall be great tribulation, such as has never been. Now watch this, or ever yet shall be. But that view, the view of Beale, and I believe Carson takes that view has to say, or has to make Jesus to be saying, for then shall be great tribulation, such as has never been, but always will be.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it just, it completely destroys Jesus's words.
It's a specific event, historical event. It's not a 2,000 years plus process.
Exactly. So this completely nullifies and falsifies, and really it exposes as argumentum ad desperatum, as far as I'm concerned, this argument of the Great Tribulation being in the time, number one, of Antiochus Epiphanes. You know, how anyone could take the time of Antiochus Epiphanes as the time of Daniel 9, for instance, and the 70 weeks. I was in an internet exchange with a former preterist a couple of years ago, and he said, yeah, Daniel 9 is the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. I said, okay, show me that during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, all prophecy was fulfilled. Show me during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes how the Most Holy was anointed. Because guess what? The very last proper high priest, Onias IV, was slain at that time, and you had two murderers appointed in succession, men who killed him, by the way, then appointed as high priest. That's the, that's the, that's the anointing of the Most Holy. That's the anointing of the high priest, anointing two murderers as high priest. And I said, now show me the world of everlasting righteousness that was established during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes.
We can't do it. And then what they try and do is they try and say, well, it was a type of, you know, what Jesus is doing. And then they go to Jesus and they give him another type,
yep,
or this 2,000 plus years process of the tribulation. And it's just like, it's amazing, just the eisegesis and the flip-flopping, and you nail them down here, it's like whack-a-mole. You nail them down here and then they pop up over here with some other weird concept, and it's just like, why can't we just stick with the text, guys?
You know, early last week, I was in a Facebook discussion with a guy. He's very cordial, very courteous, and if he watches this, I want him to know that. I think he knows who I'm talking about. But he made the argument, and he admitted that the bowls of wrath, God's bowls of wrath, were fulfilled in AD 70. And I said, well, you just surrendered the resurrection, because the bowls of wrath would be consummated in the outpouring of wrath against Babylon. Babylon is the city where the Lord was crucified. That's the time of the resurrection, Revelation chapter 11, 15, and following. Well, he came back and he said, well, I'm a partial preterist. So that means I can take AD 70 as a type of the real end of the age, the time, the real end. And I came back and I said, okay, I'm challenging you to give me one single verse that says, implies, or demands that AD 70 was a mere type of the real end. You know, I wrote a book on this some years ago. AD 70, a shadow of the real end, or question mark. And I introduced 15 reasons why AD 70 was not typological. Well, anyway, this gentleman came back and he said, well, I'll do some more study on that idea. So he went silent. But I reminded him later this week that I'm still looking for that verse, or verses that indicate, somebody tell me, somebody show us where the New Testament events were typological of end of the Christian age events.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're specifically told that the Old Testament are the types and shadows, especially in Hebrews. And in Hebrews, the better and spiritual antitypes were about to be realized in a very, very little while. He will come in a very little while. And there's not the Old Testament were types. The New Testament are imminent antitypes that are spiritual and better. But they're also kind of sort of a type as well, on top of being antitypes. You can't find that. Just like Don's saying, you can't find a verse, you can't even find a concept of that anywhere in the New Testament. And that frustrates me because, you know, again, people are so willing that they think, Don, well, because the New Testament inspired authors who were prophets did it, well, somehow me being not a prophet, I'm going to be and not inspired, I'm going to do it with what they wrote and just say what they wrote as the fulfillment. I'm just going to say, well, it was a type. Yeah, because I have that authority apparently.
Yeah, but of course they don't. But it's so interesting, and you know this as much as you study just like me. It is so interesting how pervasive this idea is. Yeah. That the events of AD 70 were typological. And one of the things that I like to point out that is so destructive to that view, Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, and he says the same thing in verse 6, but 11 is even more powerful to me. Paul gave several examples, several incidences from Israel's past history. And he says, those things were given, and unfortunately, the King James and many other translations say, as examples for us. Well, I was looking at the Greek one day, and I'm not a Greek expert, but I love to study the Greek nonetheless. I love to dig into it. I love to dig into the higher critical Greek commentators, you know, to see what those men who genuinely are Greek scholars. I want to know how they look at these Greek terms and words and phrases, etc. Well, I saw that in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11, where it is translated, they were examples of us or unto us. It's not the word translated as example. It's tupoi, types. Yeah. They were types of us.
And there are translations that do render it types.
There are translations. In fact, there are a growing number of translations. Yeah. And so I started grabbing, you know, my commentators, my critical commentators. I don't know why I had never seen that before, just a lack of study, I guess. But all of a sudden, all of these Greek commentators are pointing out how critical this passage is. Well, it had dawned on me immediately. The moment I saw they were types of us, it dawned on me that along with what he says, upon whom the ends of the ages, the word ends there is from telos, which means goal as well as termination. So here he says, those types typified us upon whom the ends or the consummation or the goal of the ages has arrived. The word arrived there is from the Greek word katentao, and it carries with it the idea of a destination. You're on a trip, you're on a journey, and if you're traveling to point X, you arrive at point X, that is katentao. You've arrived. Mm-hmm. So here's Paul saying that the events of the Old Testament and the people of the Old Testament were types. They were prophetic events, and they pointed forward. And Paul says they pointed to us 2,000 years ago. Paul says that. Mm-hmm. And the goal of all the previous ages has come upon us. Well, as I pointed out in one conversation just recently, that one of them I just mentioned a moment ago, I pointed out to this individual that when he makes Revelation and the wrath there as typological of another coming wrath at a time of resurrection, that what he's saying is Paul was wrong. The goal of all the previous ages really had not arrived in the first century. Paul was either being overly optimistic or hopeful or just simply wrong. Because the real goal of all the previous ages, the real goal wasn't going to come for at least 2,000 years, and we're still waiting on it, by the way.
Yeah.
That really honestly makes a farce out of Paul's language.
Yeah.
The end, the goal of all the previous ages has come upon us. And folks, if you've got any good commentaries, or go to Bible Hub, they've got a good long list of commentaries that you can access free of charge.
Yeah.
And see what the commentators have to say about what Paul said there, and just grasp the power of what he said. And contrast that with all futurist eschatologies who tell us invariably, well, you know what? I know Paul said that, but the real goal of all the ages is in our future. Doesn't work.
No.
Does not work at all. And consider this. Daniel chapter 12. Like I said, I think we need to look at this a little bit closer. Daniel chapter 12, after saying at that time there should be great tribulation such as never been, and at that time those your brethren who are written in the book shall be delivered, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall arise, some to everlasting condemnation, or to everlasting life, some to everlasting condemnation. Here's the resurrection at the time of the great tribulation. And you know, Mike, it's really interesting to me. Let's see, do I have that anywhere near where I can grab it? I don't think I do. No. I'm reading two books at the same time. You know how that goes. One of them, The Hope of the Early Church, the Eschatology of the first church, first century's church, and as well as the Eschatology of the Early Church. That's by DeMar and Gummerlock. The other one is by a guy named Brian. Forgive me. Brian Daly. The Hope of the Early Church. Really, really good. Very, very scholarly. But what both of these books do is they show to us that in the very earliest church, the early church believed. Now, they might extrapolate it out beyond where it was supposed to be, but the early church believed that there was an unbreakable temporal relationship and connection between the Great Tribulation and the resurrection. And that's going to be one of my lessons at the Arkansas Prophecy Conference. I'm going to validate that from Scripture. So here is Daniel chapter 12. Verse 1, Great Tribulation. Verse 2, resurrection. And the context cannot be ignored. The only way that you can escape the force of Daniel chapter 12 is literally to pervert the Hebrew. You literally have to pervert the Hebrew. And I can document that for you from Hebrew scholars who take note of those who try to change it up to avoid the power of what it says, if you acknowledge even the Masoretic text, okay, they say, well, you have to alter the Hebrew to make it support this alternate translation.
And you don't even have to be a Hebrew scholar, because verse 7, it's asked, what, in verse 5 and 6, it's asked, when are these things going to take place? When are these wonders? And he says, all these things. So all the things from verse 1 to verse 4.
Yeah.
The end, the knowledge will increase, the tribulation, the resurrection, all of these will take place during a 3.5 years period when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. So it you know, I've seen like guys like Sam try and make some kind of 2,000 plus year distinction. Well, I guess there really can't be, because we're still in the tribulation, apparently. But he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth and grabbing any kind of view he can. But you just can't do that in light of verse 7. Verse 7 just makes it real clear, and the contextual flow from verse 1 to verse 2. Yeah.
You know, I asked my friend in Israel, and of course, like I said, he doesn't like Daniel, but I asked him, is there any grammatical and textual support for the idea that there is a gap, a temporal gap between Daniel 12:1 and Daniel chapter 12, verse 2? And he sent me this explanation. And he said, there's no contextual reason for doing that. There's no textual, there's no grammatical reason to or support for saying that Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 is one event and Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is another event separated by 2,000 years. That is just not there. Right. And so and this former preterist, Sam Frost, in the book that he wrote on the resurrection, actually did a really good job of explaining grammatically how you cannot divide verse 1 from verse 2. But now he's arrived at this point, and you were talking about speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Let's illustrate that. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 is the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, according to Sam Frost. Okay. Verse 2 is the end of time.
Supposedly, yes.
Supposedly. But wait. The Great Tribulation is not really the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. It's the Christian age. Now, you talking about two sides, you know, both sides of your mouth.
Exactly.
Well, was it the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, or is it the Christian age? I think we could all agree that the time of Antiochus Epiphanes was not the beginning of the Christian age. I think we're on real safe ground affirming that.
Right.
And so back to that statement, argumentum ad desperatum, people trying to argue against such emphatic biblical statements about the relationship between the Great Tribulation and the resurrection. And I got to tell you, I'll tell a very quick story here. In my very first formal public debate on preterism, my opponent was a Church of Christ guy. And I had charts, believe it or not. I had a bunch of charts. And I got up and he challenged me on the resurrection. And I said, well, let's see what Daniel has to say about this. He had already admitted that Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is the end of the age, you know, quote, end of history, unquote, resurrection. That was his position. I said, well, let's look at Daniel chapter 12. Went down to verse 7 or verse 6. When shall these things be? What shall be the end for all of these marvels?
Wonders. Yeah.
Wonders. Well, the angel lifted his right hand, his left hand, swore by him who lives forever and ever. It shall be for times and a half time. That's the 3.5 years, as you correctly pointed out so well. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, and I pointed right down to him and I said, tell us when when Daniel's holy people were completely shattered. And he just went white. I mean, there was a stunningly visible reaction. Well, now this was not done on purpose. It was strictly accidental. My sound man was sitting directly behind them. It was just the logistics of the setup. believe you me, and I say this in all sincerity, it had nothing to do with any purposeful intent to eavesdrop, because most of the time the mics were turned off when a man was through speaking. Okay, well, the sound man did not turn the microphone off when I was done.
Ah.
And my sound man came to me afterwards and he said, Don, I owe you an apology. He said, but I heard something that you might want to hear. I said, oh, yeah. And he said, well, when you went over Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, he said, Bill, the guy was debating, turned to his moderator and said, what am I going to do about that? What am I going to do? What am I going to do about Daniel 12:7? And his moderator said, ignore it. Don't say a word. Do not say one word about it.
Wow.
Well, that's raising a white flag, waving it, and what have you. But that's the power of Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. Now, this chart that we have before you, ladies and gentlemen, shows the absolute parallel between Daniel 9 and Daniel chapter 12. Given these parallels, and let's go over them one more time. Daniel 9 is talking about 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your city. So we know what Daniel 9 is about: the people, the city. Daniel 12, the end time fate of Israel. Daniel 9 is about the end of the appointed time, the Suntulia Kairu, verse 27. It's about the time of the abomination of desolation being set up. Well, Daniel 9 says it would be set up in the temple. It very specifically tells us where the abomination will be set up. And following the abomination of desolation, we have obviously the great tribulation, the desolation of the city and the temple. And this would all be at the fulfillment of the time of the end, the consummation of the appointed time. This is the fulfillment of the prophecy of resurrection, the fulfillment of Sukkot. Sukkot is the feast of the ingathering, the feast of the harvest, the feast of the resurrection. And as we just saw, this is the fulfillment at the time of the destruction of the holy people. Well, Mike, what does Daniel chapter 12 tell us? Why don't you just go right down the list for us?
Well, we got the fate of Israel. Verse 4, we've got Kairos again, but also, another Septuagint version has the hour of the end. And of course, right. John picks up on that version of the Septuagint in his gospel of John chapter 4 and 5. An hour is coming and now is. He's talking about this verse right here, which is the resurrection of verses 2 and 3. And then we have the time of the abomination, both in Daniel 12 and Daniel 9. Again, recapitulation, guys. The Olivet Discourse, when I teach on that at the conference, I'm going to show how it's recapitulation. Mm-hmm. There's not two different comings of Christ. If so, Mark and Luke didn't get the memo because they only have one coming of the Son of Man.
That's right.
It's recapitulation. So same with Revelation, same with Daniel. And that's why these parallels are so beautiful. And then you have the great tribulation, again, the appointed end. And then, Don, can you develop Sukkot again? Like, how does this, we know it's resurrection, mm-hmm. but is there any key terms in Daniel 9 or 12 that would trigger for a Jew, oh, this is Sukkot?
Yeah, I believe that the bringing in of everlasting righteousness touches on that, because that's the new creation that is brought in by the resurrection. And Daniel chapter 12, obviously the resurrection. Sukkot is the Feast of Harvest, and that is the time of the resurrection. So those are the connections that I see that would be highly, highly suggestive. And as I pointed out before, Daniel 9 is just saturated with Festal terminology mm-hmm. and Festal concepts. You have the atonement, you have the putting away of sin, the making of the atonement. You have all of these concepts. And so when you have a text that is saturated with Festal terminology or Festal thoughts, then it's not surprising that when he comes down to the very last thing, or next to the last thing, and that is to bring in everlasting righteousness. That's almost the climax of the prophecy, and that's the climax of the festal calendar.
Mhm. That and going back to the original context of what kicks the whole 490 years prophecy off is Israel had violated Leviticus pretty much 23 through 26. She violated her feasts and her
Yes.
Sabbaths. And so it only makes sense that this prophecy would have all of those overtones to it.
Well, yeah, and second, what you just pointed out is brought out explicitly in Second Chronicles chapter 36. At the destruction of Jerusalem, the land would lie fallow for 70 years because Israel did not keep her Sabbaths. And let's not make the mistake that of thinking that the seventh day Sabbath is the only one of Israel's Sabbaths. I mean, every one of Israel's feast days were Sabbaths.
Exactly.
So, yeah, festal language. And boy, when I very first began to tie into that concept, by the way, I shared that with my friend in Israel. I mean, here he is, highly esteemed Hebrew scholar. His two sons are leading rabbis in Israel. And so I wrote him an email and I said, I want to know, can you point me to some commentaries? And I was specifically interested to know if the very, very, very famous Hebrew scholar, Rashi, called Ribi or something like that. He was an 11th century rabbi. He is still viewed today as the leading Jewish scholar and commentator in all of Israel's history. That's how dominant and prominent he was. So I said, can you point me to any of your ancient commentaries, particularly Rashi, that bring out the festal context of Daniel chapter 9? Because here's what I'm seeing, and I just delineated it in an email. And he wrote back and he said, I've never heard that before in my life. He said, I'm going to share that with some of my leading rabbinic scholar friends. And boy, he's this guy's well connected, but believe you me, just as a real quick aside, Donald Trump eats at his son's house in Los Angeles quite frequently. Take that for whatever it's worth. But nonetheless,
I take that a few ways. Unfortunately, the other way is that he just can't shake that Zionism, unfortunately.
Bingo.
We've got to get that.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. But anyway, after a couple of weeks, it came back to me. He said, by the way, your question on Daniel chapter 9, he said, I threw that by two of the leading rabbis in all of Israel. And he said, both of them said they had never heard it before, but point number one, it is an intriguing concept that, point number two, has the appearance of scriptural justification, and point number three is worthy of further investigation. So I'm going, whoa, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't need their validation to see what I think I'm seeing. Right. But when these rabbis who have such an anti-Daniel perspective, but they were intrigued by the concept, to me, that's kind of suggestive of the power of that.
Well, so, then you have the connection between Hebrews 9:26 through 28 with Hebrews 10:1, which connects the shadows of those feasts with the second appearing of Christ.
Absolutely. And then Paul's explicit statement in Colossians 2:16 and 17, where he's writing to Gentile Christians who are being pressured by the Judaizers to come under Torah. And he says, let no man judge you in respect for new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths. Well, the new moons is one of the last three feast days. That's Rosh Hashanah. Mm-hmm. New moons, feast days, well, all of them are feast days, and Sabbaths, all of them are Sabbaths. And so he said, don't let anybody bring you under the power of those, which are present active, a shadow.
Wait, Jeremiah and Sam say they were all fulfilled at the cross. What are you talking about? Present? And
I
that they
know.
were about to be fulfilled.
I know. Boy, do I know.
Memo, Don.
Which are a shadow of the good things about to come. And boy, you talk about problematic for commentators. Scott McKnight, who you and I both love him, great commentator, great scholar. Scott McKnight commenting on Colossians 2 says, well, the present active indicative Greek text here is really quite problematic for commentators. So generally what is done is the Greek tenses are, this is his word, reimagined. What does that mean, Scott?
Reimagined.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know what the heck it means until it doesn't fit your paradigm.
Bingo.
You
so
know,
what he means by it, yeah, what do you mean?
Real quick.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
These are the terms when people don't know what they're saying. Number one, they say, well, AD 70 was a type. Okay. Or they say, well, the already and not yet. And then you're like, well, the New Testament tells us when the not yet would be. And then now you have another example Don is bringing out where they don't know what to do.
They literally do not know what to do. So what Scott McKnight goes ahead to explain is that, well, yes, it's in the present active. There's no question about that. That is the Greek text. However, Paul's writing from the perspective of someone still under the law, as if the law was still in effect, although we know that the law was removed at the cross. Now, if you want an example of talking out of both sides of your mouth, this is it. The Greek text says they are present active, shadows of good things that are about to come, but you can't allow that because of your theology. Mm-hmm. So you literally change the Greek tense. You literally reject and pervert. Now, he didn't want to use the word pervert because his fellow scholars wouldn't like that. And he doesn't like that. So he just simply says reimagined.
That's such a liberal term, too. I hate that term. We have to reimagine the police force. We have to reimagine this and reimagine that. I can't stand that word. And that liberal concept fits this too, because I mean you're progressing beyond the original language.
And we see this, folks, all of the time on people who make comments on the Greek, and they do a good job on the Greek, and then all of a sudden they see the train coming and they change horses in the middle of the stream. Kenneth Gentry is a prime example of this on Revelation chapter 1, verse 19, where John was told, right, concerning the things that have been, the things that are, and the things that are about to be. Kenneth Gentry does a great job on the Greek word mello in the infinitive, pointing out that word in the infinitive means about to be on the point of. And so he used that as an argument in his book, The Beast of Revelation, the first edition of it, I believe it was.
Before the fall of Jerusalem? Or?
Yeah, before the fall of Jerusalem, to demonstrate that the book of Revelation cannot be extrapolated out over centuries. Well, when a bunch of us preterists goes, you're exactly right, Brother Gentry. Now then, let's go to Acts. Let's see, 24:14. Paul said there's about to be resurrection of the dead. Let's see, Acts 17, 30 and 31.
31,
yeah. God is about to judge the world by that man whom he has appointed. And you just look at how mellow is used in the book of Acts in eschatological passages concerning things that are about to be. So what does Kenneth Gentry do? Well, in his 2010 book, he completely changes horses in the middle of the stream. And he says, mellow, well, yeah, I once took that as about to be, but I no longer believe that to be the case. And by the way, I think Gary DeMar and Gummerlock in their book, The Eschatology of the Early Church, in a footnote at the end of the book, I do not know if it's Gary DeMar or Gummerlock who makes the comment. I haven't investigated. I just read the comment. They take note of Gentry's change, his radical change on mellow. I suspect it was Gary DeMar who wrote this footnote, by the way.
Well, Darren interviewed Gary, and in one of the teaser clips, I believe he's referring to Mr. Gentry, basically saying, well, hey, Gary, here you are, you're out there, you're being honest, you're saying, hey, these are good questions, let's study them, that full preterists are given, let's be open-minded. And you're answering questions from people, whereas Gentry lives in some ivory tower somewhere, just writes these drive-by, slams on full preterism, refuses to answer any questions. And then he says, in that interview, he says, and he refuses to deal with the changes in his books. And, like we're talking about Daniel 12:7, for 25 years, we just drilled him on that. Hey, the resurrection is at the time of the tribulation. So he finally says that. And then, but he retracts on Mello, because not only Acts 24:15 and Acts 17:31, but Romans 8:18, which basically the glory that was about to come. And in context, that's the redemption of the body, the liberation of creation. And that he could, and he had praises in Before Jerusalem Fell of Mello concerning the literal translation, specifically Young's literal, who translates all of those passages as about to be. And so Gary took note of that, and we all took note of that. And which is interesting, Don, because now that he says that the resurrection of Daniel 12:2 was fulfilled in AD 70, why have a problem with Mello in Acts 24? I mean, that is the resurrection of Daniel 12. So why wouldn't Paul?
Logically, it would seem to demand
absolutely
that he accept Mello is about to be in Acts 17 and Acts 24. Yeah,
he was losing too many texts.
Yes. And that's what this footnote goes ahead to say, that the reason that Gentry changed, for instance, on Matthew 24:27, that he once took as AD 70, but now he's taken, that's the end of history. And he says the reason he's done that is because he came to realize that there are so precious few New Testament texts that can be applied to anything other than AD 70. And so he had to find one and hold on to one. And the reason for that is the creeds.
Do you think it's because parousia is used in Matthew 24:27?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, that's probably why, because 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, he wants to make that connection. But I mean, in both sections, if you say that there's two sections in the Olivet Discourse, he uses erichomai and parousia interchangeably, as he does in 1 and 2 Thessalonians.
That's what I started to say in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Paul said, "We beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the coming parousia of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together, episynagoge, to him." And he says that's AD 70.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Gentry, like others, is struggling, continues to struggle. We hope that he continues to struggle.
But he's losing respect in the Reformed community. He's losing respect. And I think that interview, to me, really showed that. Because he, unlike Gary, who's being honest, who answers questions from people, or tries his best. And when he doesn't know an answer, he doesn't fudge most of the time like these other guys, or make up stuff. He just says, "That's a good question. I don't know."
Yeah.
But that's not what Gentry's approach is. But hey, guys, we are about 8 minutes over. So, last week we kind of reviewed Daniel in connection with Deuteronomy 32. We made the parallels and the argument stronger tonight in Daniel 9 and Daniel 12. And then next week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at Jesus' eschatology in Deuteronomy 32. And we're going to harmonize those. And you guys are going to really, really like that study. We got Kairos again. We got the end. We got the terminal generation. And then, of course, Jesus' eschatology is the hub. Moses is the foundation, or the cornerstone, upon which the Old Testament and the New Testament was built. But the Olivet Discourse is like the hub, because it's now going to connect everything in the Old Testament that Moses and Isaiah and Zechariah and all those with how the New Testament develops it. So it's the hub. And so we're going to look at Jesus' eschatology next week.
Amen.
All right, guys, have a great night. And Don, I'll see you next week. And I'll definitely see you at the conference coming up. And guys, if you don't have tickets, and if there's any way, if you want to go and you just got to contact Zach and say, hey, look, I didn't know about this. Is there any way I can get in? Maybe you can. So try.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
That I may walk before my God in the light, in the light, in the light of life, 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 in the